Oh, I hope you feel better.
So yeah, today's the first day I feel like I'm kicking it.
Oh, good.
Mm.
Well, you look fabulous for somebody who's not feeling that great.
You're so sweet.
It's true.
Uh,
Hey, John. Hi, Adam.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? Are you in place of Chief Krantz today?
Well, if he gets on, I'm leaving. So I don't know. I got an invite, so we'll see.
Okay.
I'll text him.
Hi, counselor. Hey, Mary. Is that Tara? Hey, Tara.
Hi. Mickey, is there anyone we should be waiting for before we get started?
Let me. No, it looks like we've got everybody. Tammy Bainey accepted. I don't see her here. Did you want to wait 5 more minutes for her? Do you want to get started? We could catch her up when she joins.
I think we're okay to get started. As folks trickle in, we can pause and make sure they're up to speed. Great, yeah, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon now, I guess it is. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 7th and unexpected emergency homelessness task force meeting. I'm so glad you're all here. It's great to see you. I'm particularly grateful for John and Tara, who were with us yesterday with the HLC, getting into this 2 days back to back. So thank you for the time you're making, all of you, to prioritize this work together. We're going to flip our agenda upside down just a little bit and jump into updates first, but I do want to pause and ask our co-chairs if there's anything you want to share by means of welcome before I turn it over to Mickey for updates. Commissioner Chang or Councillor Perkins, anything you want to offer as far as welcome? Welcome back.
Welcome back.
I would just say it is really exciting to have a draft strategic plan or a, really well-packaged strategic plan, and to be able to see so many of the actions in the strategic plan in motion already. We all know that we still have a lot of work to do, but it's a really nice feeling to know that we've laid out a roadmap and we're on the path already.
Thank you. Thank you. And today is going to be a working meeting. We are going to get into the strategic plan. I shared the link with you. If you didn't get it via email, please email me and I'll send you the link as Mickey goes through updates. We're going to be deep in the strategic plan document today, making sure that we're capturing all of your genius best we can as we move the strategic plan forward. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mickey, for updates, but if folks could just check and make sure that they're able to access the strategic plan. I'll also be sharing it on my screen but sometimes it's easier to be able to control the scroll yourself. So Mickey, you have some updates on the collaborative office to share with the group in the process so far?
Sure. So HB 4123 and collaborative office update, and Councillor Perkins and Commissioner Chang, please feel free to jump in if I miss anything. So basically, for some of you that don't know, Rep. Croft sponsored a bill, HB 4123. It's titled City County Homelessness Response, or I should say, City County Coordinated Homelessness Response Pilot. So HB 4123 requests $8 million for 8 pilots, and we were selected to receive $1 million over the course of 2 years. So we, as in Deschutes County and the cities of Bend, La Pine, Sisters, and Redmond. So the bill states that the pilot is to provide high-level coordination, centralized communication, and strategic visioning, and to identify opportunities to more effectively leverage existing funds and access new resources, and to create more equitable, accessible, and responsive systems. For us in particular, the collaborative office is not going to be providing direct services, so just wanted to make that clear. The League of Oregon Cities and Association of Oregon Cities supported this bill, as well as it has received support of statewide housing and houselessness leaders. Deschutes County and the cities of Bend, La Pine, Redmond, and Sisters worked together to secure the full support of for the Deschutes County pilot portion of the bill. The bill passed in legislature. It's in the governor's office waiting for her signature. And if she signs it, we'll receive $1 million, $500 each year for 2 years. So at the minimum, what this pilot requires is that we sign an IGA. We establish an oversight board consisting of members from each participating local government. So that's one elected official per county commissioner or one elected official per city council of the participating cities, and to develop a strategic plan and to commit to continued sustainable funding beyond the $1 million that we're receiving. And then we're to report back. Those are the minimum standards requirements. So given all that information, the next steps are Nick Lalak and Eric King has been spearheading this effort. We have a meeting scheduled, a joint meeting with the city of Bend and Deschutes County on April 8th, Friday. And Nick and Eric think that it's important to invite the city managers from all the participating city and one counselor to that meeting, one counselor per each city to that meeting, pending approval from the mayor of City of Bend and the commissioner board of Board of Commissioners chair, because they're the ones that create the agenda and approve the agenda. But what they're going to be proposing is that we invite the city managers and one counselor per each city, and that we start to create together the intergovernmental agreement, which is required by the bill, identifying responsibilities of the office. And as we've shared before this bill even was in the beginning phases, staff already, city and county staff already started to develop a framework, design a framework. And so we brought that to the January joint meeting. And the framework, basically, to give you an idea, the board of directors is going to comprise of one counselor per each city, participating city. There's going to be an advisory body, and we're proposing that it includes houselessness experts, representation from youth, people with lived experience, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility experts, housing and land use experts. And then there would be an executive director reporting to the county administrator. And I've heard Nick say that it's going to report to and appointed by the board as well. And there's going to be key staff to support the effort. Part of the requirement, as I mentioned, of the HB 4123 is a strategic plan. So what we're hoping to do since our last joint meeting and since this has been evolving, we now have new people at the table, participating cities at the table, city managers, other elected officials. So we're going to be proposing this strategic plan and let them know that it's going to be something that's required by the bill, and it'll help give the collaborative office a head start, and then it'll be something that they could use and build upon. So that's the update regarding the HB 4123 and collaborative office. right now we're, that next meeting will tell us a lot more about, the IGA and the roles and responsibilities of this collaborative office. Is there anything you wanted to add, Councilor Perkins or Commissioner Chang, since you've been really closely involved with the passing of this bill as well?
Go ahead, Phil.
One thing I did want to mention, so Mickey said that the first intention of these funds is not to provide direct services, but these funds are to help us set up a governance structure, develop a strategic plan, create this joint office and get it running, or this coordinated office and getting it running. That said, we have also been told that if we finish all our work, our specifically assigned work from the legislature under this legislation, and we have money left over, we can use those funds for implementation of the strategic plan. So it is very possible that some of these funds could go into direct service provision. At the same time that we're trying to figure out, we're trying to create long-term funding sources to support houselessness response efforts in the community. So I just wanted to hold that out, and kind of you just heard about, you heard from Mickey about how the strategic plan that we've developed at the Emergency Homeless Task Force, we now hope will pass muster or be accepted with minor modification by all 4 cities, not just the city of Bend and Deschutes County. So basically the potential for there to be funds for direct service provision, I think, depends in large part on how quickly we can adapt the strategic plan to meet the needs of all 4 cities plus the county.
Yeah, and I would add that as part of the funding package, we are looking to receive, $1.5 million for assistance towards increasing shelter capacity, and I think $400,000 for cleanup and sanitation services too, for the city of Bend. So please stay tuned to sort of how that will play out. Obviously, that will be a public engagement process as well.
Do folks have any questions about the collaborative office or the process? Is there anything, Commissioner Chang, to your point of making this, inviting the other communities in that have not necessarily played a leading role at the table so far, is there anything you want us to focus on today or consider today, or even just reframe in this draft document now, to make it more inclusive without assuming that sisters in La Pine in particular who haven't been at the table yet, not assuming their support without being here, but any ideas about how you want to make sure it's inclusive of them?
I think it's a really good document and plan. I think that I think it's more a matter of persuasion. Frankly, that to help all of the cities understand the phenomena of homelessness in their communities and how the actions laid out in this plan are the right ones for the entire county, our entire community, including them. Because some of the smaller cities, they have been dealing with this problem in a vacuum, kind of like in their own little bubbles. And it would be really helpful for them to understand how regionalized efforts, could both achieve efficiencies, economies of scale. How, if we look at things at a regional level, we fill gap. There's what may be perceived as a gap may actually be something that is being taken care of if you look at it at a regional scale. So I would just encourage all the service provider organizations, to the extent that you have contacts and relationships in Sisters in Lapine and Redmond, to just try to make them aware of the work that's been done on the EHTF strategic plan and how you think it addresses their needs as well. And I know the other thing I would say is, I know that each of those city councils, they're kind of scratching their heads right now, noodling on who from their council are going to engage in this regional work group, and what's the body called that's going to be created, the governance body.
Sorry, right now it's called the board of directors, but it's going to be whatever you all call it to be.
Yes. So basically, the cities are trying to decide which one councilor or mayor is going to sit on this oversight body with whoever Deschutes County and the city of Bend select to do that.
Got it. And something I'm thinking about, Commissioner Chang, thank you for that. I'm thinking about how throughout this process, and even at the joint City of Bend County Board of Commissioners meeting in January, elected officials really kept emphasizing, which I think is something we've held true here, that this is a living document, living and breathing, and has not been PDF'd yet, and may not be, right? It's I've struggled with working from a Google Doc and worrying, is this the right format for you all? But this is really something that we want to be iterative and growing. And so as Sisters and Lapine and even Redmond comes closer into the table, I want to make sure that we have space for their specific needs to be accounted for in here. Because without them at the table, we've for sure overlooked. Many of you I know work across Deschutes County, across much broader than Deschutes County for some of you. But we can't possibly hold all of the specifics of the entire county's geography. And so as this, as we bring folks in and as we make the case for this approach, I'm also really glad that it won't be disingenuous to say that it's a living document. This is something that is adapted throughout the process as new partners and stakeholders bring to light a challenge that we need to come together to work on together. And it feels like, or that we need to come together around. And it feels like just really, to your point, Commissioner Chang, important that we emphasize that collaborative aspect of it and share that as they come to join in the effort. I was really excited to see that enthusiastic sign us on toward the end of last year and early this year.
Yeah, if I gave the impression that I think it's a done deal, a finished document, we just need to sell it to the other cities, I definitely did not want to give that impression. I just think it's a very good plan that has involved a lot of regional thinking, beyond just Bend and a couple of people from the county. So I would expect that it will address a lot of the needs of the entire region, but certainly there are going to be things that, that there will be unique situations and needs that exist in all four of the cities within Deschutes County, and we want to make sure that there's room to address those.
Great. Okay. Any questions from folks on the collaborative office or that process of engaging additional community partners? Eliza, you're lighting up green, but I didn't hear anything. Did you want to jump in?
Nope. I didn't realize I was not muted.
No, it's okay. It was like occasionally jumping out. No, all good. Okay, well, great. I think we're ready to jump into the strategic plan then. We'll loop back around next steps toward the end of the meeting. So if other questions come up around the collaborative office, take note and we'll make some more space for them. All right, I did not see any requests come through, so I think folks should have access to the strategic plan. I'm going to share my screen just in case you don't, but feel free to navigate away from our faces and toward your own browser to walk through the strategic plan, particularly the action plan. What I would like to do today is take these kind of strategy by strategy. There are 5 buckets of actions, and just make sure that that folks with specific expertise around each of them have a chance to. Oh, did my screen share stop? Are you guys able to see the plan? Okay, you can. Sorry about that. So I want to go action by action or group of actions to make sure that the timelines we have suggested here are aggressive yet practical. In other words, if this is truly prioritized by our team, our office, our community, we will be able to meet this deadline or the target completion date. If not, let's be honest about it and adjust that now so that we're getting to realistic. Those are a place where I expect to have a lot of edits because those came out of my brain based on what I understand, where I understand you all to be in starting to work on each of these actions. And I also, now's the time over the next week or so to be wordsmithing the actions themselves and making edits where we feel like there can be confusion or we need clarity or we want to change direction from what's laid out here. There's certainly space for that. So we're starting down here on page 3. At the end of the meeting, I am going to bring us back to our milestones to kind of recommit to them to make sure that those are the right 5-year milestones and that given the actions we're outlining for the next 3 years, they do feel, like I said, aggressive but practical. They do feel within reach, realistic. Okay. So with that, we'll jump into our first set of actions, which is around engaging the whole community. Oh, and you know what? We had a note yesterday from HLC suggesting reordering our strategy. So I'm just making a note to myself to get to that too. This first action is around kind of who are the collaborative office's closest partners? What does a whole of community approach mean? Who needs to be engaged here? So this will be ongoing coalition building work. And I think yesterday we had the HLC suggested that we bring in philanthropy into this list in a different way, in a fundraising way. Mickey, I think you actually raised that. So I'm curious if you have other additions there or something you wanted to add. But if folks have any questions or additions to this list, that's action 1 around who the key partners are going to be. And as we move through, action number 2 is a hefty one. This is where we're putting all of the ideas we've had around public education, which was such a big priority. I remember us talking through during our fall task force meetings in particular, just how important it's going to be to have a really comprehensive public education and coordinated communications and messaging approach to this work. With the HLC board yesterday, it was raised that there's some efforts around communications and messaging that aren't necessarily strategically aligned right now. And that's something that the collaborative office could hold. Some other additions here from the last time we talked through and shared this came up from the Board of County Commissioners and the joint meeting with the City of Bend around the realities of crime and houselessness, the rates of violent crime against people experiencing houselessness, and the realities that lead to survival crimes and the impact on the public safety system. So that's a new one there. Any feedback on these? Actually, I'll talk through the last 2 and then we can see if there's anything missing from the whole whole of community bucket of actions. So in that first action, we have the list of key stakeholders. We're also suggesting that an advisory group be stood up alongside the collaborative office. So we'll have the governing body, the board, which will include elected officials, and then who are the key community partners that both the board and the collaborative office can turn to. And that's prioritizing including people with lived experience, as well as service providers, advocates, culturally specific organizations, and community-based organizations to help guide the collaborative office. And something I want to just name here is that the community has been really clear that we need to differentiate between HLC and its very specific mandates and some of the gaps that currently exist. I know it's been named here that HLC is kind of sometimes considered to be, you know, everything in the kitchen sink and holding the entire regional response. And what's actually needed is a body that can represent more beyond service providers that can do and lead this community engagement piece, not lead the community engagement piece, but be on the immediate end of the community engagement piece, right, for the collaborative office. And last is the idea of a flexible community fund, which I kind of want to attribute to someone on this call, but my memory may not be serving me right. But this is the idea of establishing a private sector fund to fill gaps where public funding isn't sufficient. And that goes into some of the philanthropic partnerships that will be needed, public-private partnerships that'll be needed. So that's a walkthrough at a very high level, particularly around Action 2 of these strategic priorities. I'm curious if folks have feedback, edits. Feel free to comment in here if you'd rather kind of wordsmith your feedback first, but would love to hear whether this is the right stuff, whether anything is missing, and whether the timelines feel accurate. A lot of this work is ongoing, but if there are any deadlines we want to apply to it, certainly open to that. Yeah, Janice.
The only concern I have or thought is there's a lot going on in the community that draws on the same pool of people for advisory and coordination functions. And it can be hard to stand up advisory boards or councils because we're small enough that there are many people who are repeatedly tapped. And so just thinking strategically about existing entities where this could maybe be a subcommittee of or connected in some way might be worth thinking about. And I think about things like our regional, our Central Oregon Health Council and the regional planning they do around social determinants of health and have members of those work groups. And a work group is different from an advisory group. I'm aware of how many people are being tapped for how many different councils and work groups and advisory groups. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's echoing something that we named early on. And I'm curious if folks have thoughts on where either this might be nested or where this advisory group might be nested, whether it's COHC and if that resonates with folks, or elsewhere, or maybe inverting that a little bit and creating ties to COHC where that work is driven kind of a bit more through the collaborative office and advisory group. I'm not sure which would feel right. It feels like COHC takes a very specific chunk of this work and focuses on it. And I think that's why I'm suggesting maybe inverting it a little bit, but recognizing again, these are all the same, a lot of the same partners in similar meetings, talking about similar or related priorities, but not necessarily aligned priorities. So I'm wondering if there are ways to better align that we should be building in here. Maybe that's the question. Curious what folks think, or Janice.
I thought about HLC as well. It's another, maybe even the more obvious group, but Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer. I'm just aware that it can make it very difficult to stand these groups up and have them be active, and robust.
I think we talked a little bit about that yesterday in the HLC board discussion with Brittany. And one of the highlights Lindsay made was just having focus on embracing and bringing in some of the new players in the community. And this obviously is not a suggestion of how, but just having that awareness that, yes, a lot of us are on the same meetings, including the service providers within HLC. So definitely echoing what you're saying. And that was something that was brought up as well yesterday. And maybe it's figuring out what line item we add of how to invite some new players.
And I think just kind of like echo on that we don't always have to reinvent the wheel with things. Like the HLC just added on a youth advisory committee. So if we're wanting someone to represent youth in this group, then having someone from the youth advisory committee doing that, which is ran by Jay Barjay. So I can say that would be easily something that we could do. So I think that there are groups doing this, and maybe they have an idea of who would be a good fit.
Yeah, Eliza, maybe that does look like a representative from each of the HLC committees, and then it's not a HLC live like that. It doesn't live within HLC, but I'm going to pluck one person from each of these different aspects.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because we have the shelter committee, we have the youth advisory committee, we have all of these committees. So it would encompass a lot of those things that you guys are looking for.
Colleen?
I would really echo the concerns that Janice brought up. As somebody who's tapped to go to meetings, I think last week I had 17 hours of meetings in addition to direct service and trying to run an organization. So the more I think that we can figure out ways to streamline, whether through like designated liaisons and report outs, or collapsing some of the work, nesting underneath. I think I sit on the Health Council Stable Housing Work Group, and I'm happy to chat further about those priorities. But I think that there has been kind of like a growing question from those participants about how that group intersects with Housing for All, and how it intersects with like the OHP health priorities and the HLC and these different funding sources. So I think that there's like a growing like energy to have some of that collaboration be better spelled out in the priorities, like in the agenda items and in how funding is spent. But I think that would be a lot of conversation to figure out where the compromise lives. Because I would love to see that happen. And I don't know specifics for how technically that would happen, but I would love to see some of those meetings kind of collapsed into each other.
What would be the best way from your expertise to explore that, to collapse the meetings into each other? Maybe, with the stand up of the collaborative office, I want to recognize that it's changing, it's seeking to change the structure of business in Deschutes County. And so is there kind of a reset moment with each of kind of, whether it's committees or organization wide, where we kind of workshop it of, where who's on first now, where are our mandates now, and how do we align, and what's duplicative, and how do we get clearer on our specific purposes, rather than needing to start from the beginning with each and sharing the same updates in several places. I'm not sure if folks have ideas about that, or if that's something we want to suggest, maybe even going into the April 8th meeting, where that's an opportunity to bring in folks from the Pine and Sisters and Redmond a little bit closer, to talk about this question of how we organize more efficiently feels like the question at hand. But I'm open to suggestions about whether we're not ready for that or ways to approach it.
I want to put Janice on the spot and pose a question. If the meeting we had recently that was about kind of crosswalking the priorities between the OHP and RIP, I wonder if like duplicating that type of meeting between some of these partners could help figure out where the overlaps are.
I don't know. I think, so here's my personal bent. I like to take what's working and build on it. So we have some groups that are working well right now. HLC is one, COHC is one, COIC is one. I mean, we have some entities, and there are others that I'm not aware of. I'm just speaking to the ones that I'm aware of. So I'm inclined to say, don't reinvent the wheel. Take an entity that is working well, figure out what additional support it needs to do better or more, and build on what we have. I think anytime, and I think about this in transitions of care with clients, right? Anytime we transition a client from one service to another, we lose them. We lose momentum. We lose something in translation. And I think when we try to rebuild work groups, we lose something there too. These take a lot of energy to stand up. And I'd say take what you've got and improve on it rather than recreating. So if HLC works well and you need an advisory council, maybe it's convened out of HLC, right? And or something else. I don't want to pick one because I'm not expert enough about the work groups in this lane to have a strong view, but I'll bet you have some good working groups you could build on. So that's my thought. It's probably too simple to be sophisticated, but it might actually work.
I appreciate that. And that I feel like that is a recommendation to bring back Mickey to the governance design process and a consideration to hold. I know what I've heard from HLC, and I invite pushback if I don't characterize this the way that it's intended. But what I've heard from HLC is that without designated staffing for their existing mandates, that's beyond. So to even to say we'll invest in HLC in order to do this, that's going to be balance that might be off, since HLC doesn't have the existing capacity that it actually needs to meet all of its mandates, ideally. And so I'm curious if it's something to bring back to the governance process of how could a collaborative office strategically invest in some of the structures that already exist in order to build the community engagement that we need capacity for. But I welcome other thoughts too, if folks have other ideas or if I didn't frame that correctly around where HLC might be.
I just feel that HLC is a collaboration of community partners. It's not it's not like an official organization or an official agency. And I think, Eliza, you just unmuted and I don't want to speak out of turn. Do you want to go?
No, you can
ahead?
Keep going.
Okay. I mean, I know that there's a lot of work right now going into just the structure of HLC so that it's efficient and that the vision is clear and that the responsibilities within HLC are clear. And I just don't think that it makes a lot of sense. I agree with what Janice is saying though, of like, again, like not in reinventing the wheel. But I'm not sure if there's a specific group that's already working would encompass this direction.
Yeah, I think that it would be easy for the board of HLC like to look at some like a proposal for something and be like, okay, yeah, we can do that. But if we're not sure what that's going to look like, how much time it entails, how much oversight it requires, it's hard to like stamp your name on it, because it may be something that we're already doing or that we do have the capacity to do, but unless we're sure what all it would entail. I think that it's just like when we add another committee to the HLC, if it's work that's being done in the community already, which like with the Youth Advisory Committee, it was, but that now they're able to advise the HLC and any partners of the HLC, it just grows capacity under that organization. So I guess that's a non-answer answer. Sorry.
No, it's helpful. It's helpful. I think these are all considerations to hold as the strategic plan keeps iterating, right? Because as to the points earlier, as we bring in Lapine and Sisters and Redmond more formally or fully, there's going to be questions there too of how that community engagement is prioritized and where they're, with less community capacity than the city of Bend, they'll have the same questions around efficiencies and economies of scale. And so it feels like this is going to be an ongoing question for us to keep considering, and something that we'll ask to be held close in governance in particular, because elected officials will need to be connecting and supporting some of the community engagement and streamlining that's really needed in order for this to be done effectively. Colleen and then John.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in. This might contradict what I said a minute ago, but I think that this is probably important enough and distinct enough from other groups' priorities that it's worth standing up a separate advisory group. And I think that both the geographic differences between a focus on Central Oregon in the case of Housing for All and the Health Council and HLC versus a Deschutes specific focus is one reason. But I also know that the other groups do have pretty specific other mandates and priorities. And maybe I sit on those boards, and maybe it's possible that some of those could be collapsed into each other or lend support to this effort somehow. But it just seems like, based on this pretty ambitious and I think awesome strategic priorities, that it's worth having a separate standalone advisory group that leverages the expertise of those other groups without trying to fit into another set of priorities.
So yesterday, I mentioned the example of winter shelters. About 5 years ago, there was a big increase in the awareness of the importance of having winter shelters across Central Oregon. And once that happened, a lot of progress was made. And today, we have winter shelters pretty much across the region, which is a really big step forward. And so public awareness of the needs and the ways to meet those needs, I think, is a really, really important role here. And I think it's an important goal of the structure of this plan. But on the subject of the HLC, so there are committees. Obviously, there's the Shelter Committee. There's also the Community Engagement Committee, which could play a role here in liaising with the structure of this plan. So you could have the HLC sort of representing its knowledge from service providers of what the needs are and what the tools should be for meeting those needs, and then transferring that knowledge or transferring that awareness over to the structure of this plan, which would then envelop greater, as I understand it, it would increase the community awareness in ways that don't just include service providers. And that's really, really important, because that will then all trickle down, we hope, to the action that engages the population that we're serving, the houseless community. Because the concern I have is, whatever the output of this structure is, how does it connect with the ground level where the work is being done, and how is that happening efficiently? And a big part of it is having really strong awareness of what's needed, so that there isn't a lot of time that needs to be spent necessarily on educating people or rediscussing things that a lot of folks already know, but maybe just haven't spread around.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Was someone going to jump in? Go ahead, Colleen.
Sorry, I was just going to agree with John about that there are specific committees working on some of these priorities already. And maybe the model for an advisory group becomes like a hub and spokes model where the different priorities here are alluding to efforts that are ongoing. Like I know that there's one that focuses on permanent supportive housing and like what Fuse is working on. And maybe the spoke in that case is to Fuse working on that, or like the HLC Community Education Committee is another spoke, but that those different areas of expertise or ongoing existing work groups could kind of inform the work through some structure that the joint office would provide.
Any thoughts on that from others? I appreciate both points and ideas. John, you're centering on a really strong awareness of what's needed is something I wrote down verbatim. To be clear that is not completely in this plan, and that's why this community engagement is so necessary, so that we build shared understanding of exactly what's needed so we can figure out exactly how we get there. And Colleen, that the hub and spokes is really resonating with me. And I want to recognize that there's going to be different, we're going to have to kind of take an equity orientation to it of some of these spokes do know exactly what's needed. There are pretty solid projections or first steps or estimates where that's information that can probably be fed right to the collaborative office. There's maybe already an ask of exactly how much funding is needed in the next 3 years. And other groups may have strained capacity, and some of the ideas laid out in the strategic plan may be beyond their reach, and their ask for the collaborative office would actually be, we can't be a spoke on our own. We need you to be investing in our infrastructure here, or supporting this, facilitating this to move forward. So that advisory group hub and spokes model feels really, really helpful for me to think about. Curious if other folks have thoughts on it, or how and whether we'd want to integrate it in here. Okay. I am going to move us on to our second bucket of strategies, but I will give us a pause first. At the top of the hour, I'm going to give us a 5-minute break. 2 hours is a long time to be staring at a Google Doc and in deep conversation. So I will be giving us a 5-minute break in about 10 minutes, just a heads up. Any last questions, comments, concerns, flags around this first bucket, the whole of community approach, public education and community engagement here? Okay. All right, I'm going to keep moving us on to the collaborative office itself. So again, this is, we have several actions here. I think we've talked a lot about these through the task force, these 4 key, the core functions, I'm sorry, I was trying to remember the term we use. The core functions of the collaborative office were developed through this task force, and I think our October meeting. You'll see those outlined here. And again, this is kind of a little bit describing how the strategic plan will be held, monitored, and implemented. Less specific on the what exactly and more the how. Any feedback or questions around the actions captured here around the collaborative office? Or corrections to the timeline? Mickey, if there are updates we should make here, please jump in too. Something I want to name that I put in here is that I gave us December 2023 as kind of a milestone deadline to have alignment. It'll take time to build that. Funding cycles are different at local and state levels. And so it'll take time for the collaborative office to connect with all local funding decision makers to come into alignment around the vision, to gather information and realign as needed. So that feels like a big date here of December 2023 is when this will be fully operating. The goal would be for the whole community to be on the same page as far as priorities. That doesn't mean that everybody's funding the same thing. That just means that they're strategically aligned, they're complementary, they're working together toward a shared vision and a shared goal. Okay. Is there anything that folks would want to see outlined in the strategic plan regarding the collaborative office that's not here? Maybe accountability oriented, or just making sure that it's a central element of the collaborative office?
Brittany, what does that mean? Sorry, accountability oriented as a central aspect of the collaborative office.
Just a suggestion of the type of thing that could be seen as missing here. If you want to build in more community accountability, we'll have a governing board through the IGA that is elected officials leading the collaborative office. Is there anything here on responsibilities to the community writ large that we want to build in as far as accountability to lean on? And really that was just an example of the type of thing you might want to see more of than is in here. So didn't mean for it to be a leading comment, but just an example.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, I am going to shift us on the screen into strategy number 3 around expanding services. And I'm going to give us our 5-minute break a little bit early, if that's okay with folks. This is a heavy one we're about to get into. So I'm going to give us some time. If you need a bio break, etc., please feel free, and we'll come back at the top of the hour to get into strategies 3 through 5. Thanks, everybody. See you in a sec. Okay, I'll give folks a minute to come on back in before we dig into this big priority. This one has subsections, which I can only blame on myself. All right, I'm going to get started walking through it, and folks can come up to speed as you scroll through. Like I said, this one has, so we're on strategic priority 3 on page 9, which is around expanding services. And I think, this could be a strategic plan in itself. I'm not going to do that, but I want to be clear that this is a lot of the work, a lot of the implementation lives in this and the next 2 strategic priorities. So what we have here are 3 or 4 sub groups. They're in the blue heading just to keep us focused. We have developing additional funding streams for supportive services and the actions that'll be needed to do that. Expanding case management and rebuilding the workforce, given the pandemic and the economy more broadly. The third is making all community and public resources accessible to people experiencing homelessness, which is really about how we bring in mainstream system or upstream system partners. I think I shared with the County Commission and the City Council in January that a lot of the times the things that will prevent people from experiencing homelessness are in fact services available in the community, but they are not available to people experiencing housing instability. They're not accessible. So this is really around accessibility of other resources, particularly the ones that folks lifted up during our action planning meetings and before. So those are the different categories of work that we know needs to be done when it comes to expanding services. I'm curious if folks have initial reactions or places you want to dig into here. This, again, you'll have, I think, until the end of next week, probably. I got a few out of offices until next Monday. So I'm going to give folks until the 28th to offer written feedback, and then I'll do a quick turnaround from there. No, not the 28th, the end of next week. So I think that's April 2nd, maybe. I'll look at a calendar in a minute and let you know. But if there are things that you want to talk through together now, I'd love to hear those, and then also recognize that this might be a section that's easier to sit with and kind of copy edit your way through if you have additional thoughts. So I just want to open it up and see where folks have interest, energy, questions around funding streams and funding for supportive services, case management, supporting the workforce, and supporting other public services in becoming more accessible to people experiencing homelessness.
Can someone explain the number 5 there? Oh, go down.
Sorry.
There it is. Yeah. There. Stop. Where'd it go? Oh, there. Yeah. Up there. Sorry about the elected officials supporting. There it is. Yeah. Can someone explain that a little bit more to me?
Yeah, so that was something that was named in action planning as an opportunity for elected officials who are engaging on the issue of houselessness to better understand the restrictions in federal funding, the challenges that HLC navigates in determining funding priorities, limitations, capacity, and also I think adding capacity to HLC in particular through that process. The application, from what I understand, and Tara, I can't remember if this is something you raised or others, but what I understood what I understood from this conversation is that when NOFO scoring comes up, there's often a limited number of folks who can objectively review and support the application process because, like we were saying earlier, so many of the same folks are at the same tables. And so, you can't be reviewing an application for your peer or a place where you also have interest in getting that funding. So the additional capacity would be helpful, but I think it's also a particular spot where folks named that elected officials could be more engaged to better understand what's going on and what's needed. So I think some synergy between or some overlap between the governing board of the collaborative office and the HLZ application review process, or collaboration otherwise, is what was lifted up here. But Eliza, Tara, others on HLC, feel free to jump in if there's more you'd like to clarify or add or amend. Does that track, Councilor Perkins? Is there anything you'd want to edit there that doesn't feel right?
No, I just saw that and wanted to highlight. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Commissioner Chang.
I just have one addition for the list of potential funding sources. Many of you have heard me talk before about tax foreclosed properties. The county is the tax collector for all of the taxing districts within Deschutes County, school districts, cities, fire districts, what have you. And occasionally there are property owners in Deschutes County who do not pay their taxes for 5 years straight, at which point they are foreclosed on, and then those properties are sold. We collect that revenue and we distribute it to all of the taxing districts, little tiny pieces. In Multnomah County, instead of having a system like that, they sell all these tax foreclosed properties and they keep all the funds in a single pool to be focused on affordable housing and housing insecurity initiatives. And so this is a potential for an additional funding source that we could explore here in Deschutes County on a typical, there have been in the last few years, there has been years where the revenue after fixing the properties up and then selling them, the net revenue is $600,000-$800,000. So it's a substantial amount of funding to work with if you keep it all in a consolidated pool instead of saying like, hey, City of Bend, here's your $70,000, which is, I'm sure is nice, but like, you can't really do a whole lot with $70,000. You can do a lot with a pool of $700,000.
Thank you. That is excellent. And I added it in there as letter J. And that is exactly something that we'll hold, or the community will hold throughout this process, is that no one revenue stream is going to change the game. It's a matter of looking at these opportunities and seeing how they can build on each other and be added up. So I think that's a great one to add in here. Patty.
I just wanted to talk about letter H, Emergency Solution Grant. We currently only get about $147,000 in our ESG grant, and that is already allocated out to all the various shelters tri-county wide. So if you were going to use that, we'd either have to get additional or, it can be moved around, but right now it's all allocated.
Yeah, I think a lot of these are probably either allocated at capacity. That's why we have expanded in there. Whether that's something to explore. To me, this is a matter of putting them on the table and making sure that they're all aligned. So maybe that needs to be brought in too, that it's understanding what ESG is currently covering, what it could be covering, where it could be expanded or not, what its limitations are, et cetera.
Yeah, currently it's given out by a formula from OHCS to the various community action agencies. So we don't have a lot of say of getting more. Sometimes there's extra grants we can apply for, and we usually do as a community, tri-county wide.
And I think HB 2100 is likely revisiting that OHCS formula and process too. I'm not sure what the timeline is going to wind up being on that, but that's a conversation that the Racial Disparities and Homelessness Task Force statewide has been having. Officer Krantz, Chief Krantz.
Hey, I just want to go back on Commissioner Chang's tax for close property revenue. Just, several of these revenue potential streams, most of them are already committed 100% plus, or some of them, but specifically, I think it's, it's good to be creative, but thinking about some of the also consequences, negative consequences, or specifically tax foreclosure properties. Some of those tax foreclosures actually result in making more people homeless. So the idea of that is that if there is, now certainly not all of them. Some people just, I guess, choose not to pay their taxes for a long time, and that's the case. But I have some experience around trying to find sources to assist with property taxes for people who can't afford them and are facing basically foreclosure and move into the streets first getting their taxes paid. And I could not find any last year through that. Someone I was trying to help was in Multnomah County, through the city, through the state. There was no source to assist someone, and essentially they're losing their house and they will be homeless within probably 6 months now, as soon as that tax foreclosure occurs. So in alignment with that, it may be reasonable to say what is potential to utilize that, but also maybe set up a fund for assistance from the same fund for people who truly meet whatever standards identified, but will need some sort of help to stay in their house because that may be the only thing they have, and they will be homeless if they don't have it. Just a thought.
Yeah, and Chief Krantz, I just wanted to, I glossed over the foreclosure process part, but we make a very serious effort to help people figure out what their options are prior to foreclosure. Typically, people have the real opportunity that people have is to just sell the property before it gets foreclosed. Because if we foreclose on it, then they lose basically all the value in that property. If they sell it before it gets foreclosed, they can recoup oftentimes a substantial amount of equity out of it. And I saw Brittany already also putting something up about eviction prevention and work like that. We absolutely should be thinking about that end of the equation as well. How do you keep people in their homes? And we work really closely with a variety of entities on funneling community development block grant funds so that people can fix things on their homes, that their existing homes, so that they don't become uninhabitable, or so they can address large costs like, oh, my well went dry, or my HVAC system is dead, and my house is now uninhabitable. I can't live there anymore. So there's definitely a lot of work, not just by the county, but by a number of organizations in the community. Neighbor Impact plays a central role in helping people keep their houses inhabitable in the community. So just the fact that I glossed over that doesn't mean that there's not a whole lot of efforts to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep people in their homes.
Thank you for going over some of that. I appreciate it.
You for raising an important concern.
Thank you. Thank you both. Colleen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, on this list of funding sources, I love the diversity and the creativity, and love that the office will be thinking broadly about exploring those. I'd also hope, kind of to Patty's point about the emergency solutions grant, that exploring could include that upwards advocacy to shift the federal formula allocations that disproportionately are hurting Oregon and Central Oregon especially. And I know that there's talk of that changing. But yeah, just if exploring could also include advocating for shifts even that seem too big. I think that Central Oregon might be the entity to take some of that on. And I just wanted to especially say that I love point number 3 and 7 on here. Just the technical support and creating the sustainable funding streams for supportive services is the biggest barrier to developing permanent supportive housing, and permanent supportive housing is what I think is really going to make a long-term solution. So I love that these points are really getting at what I have come to learn is the biggest pillar that we need to build together. So I really like this section. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Colleen. And I think we did capture, I'm not going to look for it here because it slows down my browser when I go off of the literal page I'm on, but we did integrate throughout here some advocacy support priorities, both toward the state level and even considering federal advocacy and what that can look like. I think that's actually captured in the collaborative office section. So thank you. That's maybe I'll add an implementation note around ESG there too. Great. Glad the PSH work feels substantial in here and like the right stuff. John.
Yeah, I talked about this yesterday. In addition to either expanding existing services or adding new services, I think there should be some focus on planning services that already exist so that they're synchronized instead of sometimes incompatible with each other. And an example of this is sometimes there's a triangle between shelter, recovery or detox services, and mental health services. And what happens is a person has a dual issue where they have substance abuse issues and they have mental health issues. So often because of their substance abuse issues, it's hard for them to get mental health treatment because mental health services don't like to regard themselves as being recovery services or even being a shelter. And then so they're not getting mental health services, and often not having that, they don't really get the guidance they need in order to engage fully in recovery. And so that being lacking, often they're dysregulated enough that they can't even safely stay in a shelter, even a low barrier shelter, which pretty much puts them out on the street in their addiction and lacking the mental health guidance that they would need to sort of address those issues. So that's just an example, and that can happen. Having a joint office that includes all of the jurisdictions that have all of these services, it's a great opportunity to figure out how to synchronize those things. What's the steps? What's the plan to walk somebody through a situation like that so that they're just not left out in the cold, sometimes literally. And I think that could be, it's a big issue, and it's a really great opportunity for what this kind of structure could achieve if they focus on that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. And Janice, I want to invite you in here too. I see your hand up. So I think we have a lot of the behavioral health, which is substance use treatment or substance related care and mental health care in one action. So I'm curious if what you're speaking to, John, is captured here. Janice, same question to you of what you see as necessary to align or bring existing services into alignment is captured here, or whether there's more work we need to outline or name. But Janice, your hand was also up separately. So if you want to bring in your question or comment too, please do.
No, it's directly relevant to what John is saying. I completely agree. And I think what we experience, I mean, certainly in the community mental health world, I've been working heavily on reminding staff that 70% of the people we serve experience addiction, and that we have to be really excellent at providing care to people with co-occurring mental health and substance use conditions and trauma and health issues. But in the residential and treatment world, the bifurcation is extreme. And that is in part because of the way that the state has chosen to certify facilities and pay for services. And so I'm just trying to see if I can see if you've addressed the payment issues and the state licensing issues, which I think drive some of this fantasy, frankly, which is that you can treat mental health conditions in the absence of addressing substance use disorders and vice versa. So we really, really see that in terms of, residential facilities, inpatient substance use versus mental health treatment. People dealing with addiction may be told, well, we can't really address your trauma until we've addressed your addiction, but the trauma symptoms may in fact be the exact triggers for the addictive behaviors. So I'm preaching to the choir, but I think it's actually a really critical piece of where we've gone wrong in meeting the needs of the people that we see in the unhoused population. And that requires state level advocacy, rule changes, certification changes, payment structures to be addressed. So there's some advocacy work somewhere in here that shouldn't get ignored.
Got it. And is there, so it sounds like either an action around advocacy or some details in here around the need for that advocacy. Is there anything else we need to name, to John's point, around service provision coordination, whether there's anything we can do locally to facilitate stronger connections or better connections? John, do you see the needs that you named, do you see them captured here, or is there something else we need to bring in? I'm thinking about this.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I guess I would just highlight the general issue, which is examine where there might be incompatibilities or paradoxes in the way service is delivered and address those so that services can coordinate instead of, I don't want to say get in each other's way, but it's kind of what happens is there's the hope that maybe the person can get recovery, and then once being successful in recovery can engage more meaningfully in mental health services. But the truth is, without coordinated service at the same time, that even that first step is not likely to succeed. And if the person went in the other direction, they're probably even less likely to succeed if they're not getting any help to address their addiction while they're starting to engage in mental health services. And in both of those things being true, they are much more at risk for being considered unsafe to stay at shelters based on how the condition can aggravate and then manifest itself in kind of escalating behavior. Now, you don't have to go into all that kind of detail, but just that general point about addressing situations where delivery of service has to be intentionally coordinated in order for the service to be meaningful. Maybe something to that effect.
Yeah, I totally 100% agree. I also think an additional point could be training. So some of this is about culture that's created by how people are trained in these different tracks of service provision. And a lot can be accomplished by training local professionals to address substance use disorders and mental health conditions simultaneously.
Which partners would be best suited to pull in there? Thinking back to what we were talking about so many tables, such little capacity. And I see a clear call for coordination, right? So I'm wondering if there are existing either structures or partners with the training expertise, or just if we need to name best practices of other communities that have stood this up and other needs that we need to name that are not met here yet.
I would think about the consortium, which is a new entity doing some training in the community. I would think about our educational partners, COCC, which has a CADC program, OSU and PSU distance learning program. All of them are producing, that's a terrible word, training wonderful professionals entering our community doing this work. And the CCO, which often helps set standards of expectation and payment for services. So those are the ones I can think of. John may have some ideas or others as well.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of delivery of services. Obviously, the Deschutes County Behavioral Health would be really important. Perhaps the Central Oregon Health Council and their connections to recovery treatment providers could also be important. Wherever this is examined in terms of what kind of funding has to be provided, when there have to be changes to existing service models, or yeah.
Great. Okay. If you don't mind, I'd like to work with the two of you on shaping a tight action around this to propose. I don't want to get. You've offered a lot, and I want to make sure I get it right. So I'll be emailing you in the next week about this. Awesome. Behavioral health more broadly, is there anything that we're not capturing here? I hear that call for coordinated care, state advocacy to help facilitate that, supporting partners on training to improve behavioral health care provision, even outside the structure of designated substance use treatment centers or mental health facilities. Is there anything else regarding behavioral health that we want to lift up here?
Janice and John, what do you think, if it's already in here, forgive me, but capacity, increasing, expanding capacity, not just for Deschutes County behavioral health, but also Janice, for like in-house behavioral health support at the housing level? Does that fit in here somewhere? What do you think?
Maybe, I'm not sure. I know you're referring to the conversation we had earlier. I think the concern that we've had, and I think Commissioner Chang referred to it early on in this discussion, is just making sure that as we're standing up facilities and housing opportunities, we're not sort of imagining that the existing behavioral health array will be adequate to provide the in-house on-site behavioral health supports that people might need to be successful. So we've got to think about, Colleen and I are talking about Cleveland Commons. Behavioral health clinicians at Deschutes County will of course be involved with many of those individuals, but not all. So how are their needs supported on site? Is the Mosaic Medical Partner, who has some behavioral health consultants on site, going to be adequate to meet the need? That's where the gaps are that really worry folks like me. Because if they're not addressed in the planning, what it means is, our crisis team responding to those residential facilities all day long, every day of the week, because there isn't skilled capacity on site to respond to low-level crises of people having behavioral health needs. Sorry, that was a lot, but.
No, and I completely agree with Janice, and just wanted to add to that, for the Cleveland Commons project, we have a lot of generous startup funding, and we're expected to braid services funding from the state, but it does leave a very concrete gap where we need just either a clinical person or a designated case manager to be there full-time, 40 hours a week, designated for those folks. And that's where that gap in really stable funding comes in, where we need to fill that gap. But it's hard to braid 1 and 2 year funding sources where we have to demonstrate 10 plus years.
I'm not hearing an additional action there. I hear this kind of reaffirming what we've said above, which is a good place to get to in a strategic plan, to see the connections across. Okay, any other thoughts or comments here on funding for supportive services? Okay. Going to move us down to expanding case management, rebuilding the social service sector workforce. I think this also kind of reinforces some of the conversation we just had that I'll loop back to needing adequate funding. And in the conversation with HLC yesterday, we talked a bit about why this priority is here around the social service workforce. It's been recognized throughout the process that part of the reason that there are workforce strains are that folks are not paid enough. Frontline case workers are not paid enough to live here while also working here. And so there's a focus on that as a direct roadblock to expanding services to the degree needed in Central Oregon. There's also an emphasis on peer support specialists, and I know a lot of that hiring and work is already underway, so there's a lot to build on there. If there aren't any questions or comments there, we get into the broader section that brings us into some of our prevention and diversion work, but making sure that all community and public resources are accessible to people experiencing homelessness. And this is bringing in kind of a different hub and spokes with coordinated entry and making sure we're building connections between the homeless service system and all of the other partners in the community that are supporting and providing services to neighbors writ large. So this is where you'll see a lot of the practical challenges that were raised throughout the task force, particularly in action planning, come up and be named. That many people experiencing homelessness face barriers in regaining stability due to lack of transportation, due to inaccessibility of pet care, or storage, or accessibility of food and meal services. So that is all named here under the idea that the collaborative office will support those other partners in understanding how to make their services accessible to people experiencing homelessness. So this is a big list. This is a lot of work. It is also the direction that you'll see the federal strategic plan to prevent mental homelessness go into. That's in development now at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. I heard from the executive director a couple of weeks ago that there's a strong emphasis on prevention and upstream systems, as we call them, in homeless services. But those other sector partners that may assume that the homeless services sector is taking care of all of the needs of people experiencing homelessness when we know that is impossible, not true, and overlooking their own mandates. And that is not ill-intentioned, but it's real in many communities. So that is all outlined here. And let's see, we have a particular emphasis on veterinary care and pet care that's come up a lot, particularly from folks working in the shelter and outreach spaces. Any additions to the rest of this section or these actions? Any questions? Cool. All right, there are some innovative ideas in here, which all came out of action planning and learning from other communities. So kudos, there's some really good stuff here. A lot of genius came out of those conversations. All right, we are on to addressing unsheltered homelessness. We have about, let's see, 25 minutes left, so we're pretty good on time here. Okay. Priority 4 is addressing the crisis of unsheltered homelessness. And this is similarly very rooted in understanding the challenges that people who are living unsheltered face in Deschutes County. So basic needs are at the top here. Bathrooms, showers, garbage collection, recycling collection. Again, storage is lifted up here. These have been, a lot of this was processed through in our action planning meetings, and a huge shout out to the folks that were able to join, because we really dug into questions around, what is it that folks who come into your services, what are the barriers you hear them name that they've been facing all along or continue to face? So mail delivery came up as a big one. You'll see that in action 4. the need for really streamlining outreach services, which I know HLC is already working on, but folks named that HLC could use a collaborative offices support in that. Summer cooling centers and winter warming centers, per John's comment earlier, there's been really great progress there. And I've heard folks name a need to keep pushing that forward and keep expanding until the need is fully met. This also names some of the work around crime that'll be needed to understand that homelessness needs to not be criminalized in Deschutes County. And that's per the public safety issues that we spoke about earlier and that came up in the joint office meeting. So those are outlined in, or the joint city county meeting, I apologize. We have by name list captured here. And then we get into the authorized camping, safe parking, and building shelter capacity. So again, this is a really deep set of actions and priorities. I'm curious where folks have questions, interest, or if this is something that folks want to sit with. It's a lot.
I mean, speaking from an elected official who has battled this a lot over the last few months, particularly, this is definitely like the hardest part to sell, this whole section here. Yeah, and this is the area that we most desperately need community buy-in. Yeah, and so I struggle with it because without community buy-in, none of this is either going to be possible or going to be a success, you know, in our city, the city of Bend. So.
That's why we listed community engagement as the first tab.
Yep, I remember that, Phil.
And a lot of the idea here, as far as the collaborative office's role, is to not reinvent the wheel and to demonstrate that the community broadly is learning from each successive project, building on it, and building faith in the processes too, that citing authorized camping, safe parking, and tiny home villages, all of the communities that are at the table will have access to the same processes and the same input, so that there's a sense that that what's happening is what's happening, right? That elected officials are working together on this, trying to understand how to meet both housed and unhoused neighbors' needs, prioritizing safety for all and the well-being of all, which brings us a little bit back to our vision statement.
Yeah.
Is there anything we need to add here or want to amend?
I will just have a comment, and I think following on Council Perkins' kind of expression of difficulties in having a full community buy-in or reception of some of this material, specifically around Unsheltered. And I think we need to understand how to frame it appropriately, in that when much of the community who experiences being a victim of things such as low-level theft, shoplifting, trespassing, criminal mischief, things that are not necessarily acceptable crime because someone is homeless. So it's not a crime that someone commits because they're trying to survive necessarily, but it is, I think the confusion or the where we lose a lot of community is at when they read things like this that says, don't criminalize homelessness, and then it gets expanded to something that means something much different. Like we won't charge anyone, or a DA's office has a policy around not taking charges for anyone if they identify as homeless, or it gets expanded, and then the community doesn't feel like they're heard as a whole, or at least people who have been victims of certain crimes that aren't necessarily camping crimes, but different things. So, and also the other part of that is, I think there's a large percentage of the community that feels like if we're putting a tremendous amount of money, resources, effort into identifying safe shelter spaces, whether it be a warming or cooling shelter, or safe camping, or RV parking, or managed camps, that then we should have a reciprocal effect of also not allowing widespread unmanaged camping all around the rights of ways in the city. And that's where I think we lose people, is that if you're going to put all this effort into this, then we should also just say, and we're not accepting this as a community as well, because there's these options. So I think that's where we lose a huge part of the community. I mean, I get all day, and I'm sure the counselors do too. And so that's where I think we have to have a reality discussion in kind of that bigger picture of what are we going to say is okay and not okay. We can't just say we're going to do all this and it's okay to do whatever you want to, because that loses the bigger community.
Yeah, I think that's an important point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, something I'm holding here is that when facing, I want to hold it all at once, right? That folks push back against managed camps, safe parking, shelter siting is often rooted in deep-seated fear. And when something is rooted in fear, there is not room for another idea to grow. And so we come back to that community engagement and public education piece, which I think should be just as much engagement as it is education, giving folks time to process through that fear that they carry, to see the police department standing by, holding that fear, and also creating space for that to be truly held, and then to recognize that the city is at a moment of trying, or the whole community is at a moment of trying to balance. There are at least 500 people, if not many, many more, living outside in the city of, well, there are varying numbers. There are a lot of folks living outside and opening shelter by shelter at 60 beds, 80 beds, even 100 beds on a 1 year by 1 year basis. We're on a slow tilt and holding the fact that everyone's safety needs to be prioritized in that time, and recognizing that there are community leaders willing to do that is really, really powerful. So as challenging as it is, I think spaces for communities' fears to be named, and also for people experiencing homelessness to have their challenges heard, named, and addressed as well is really powerful. And I think one of the most beautiful parts of the ideas that came together in the strategic plan.
I appreciate that. I think something we would need to do in that engagement piece then is find successful examples, because I don't think it's an unbased.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we look at the larger unmanaged camps here, there's a legitimate fear from our community of when they're near them or around them of being threatened and crime victims. Now, that does not mean to say everyone in a camp is potentially engaged in criminal activity. I think it's the few, just like the community at large, that engages in criminal activity and problematic behavior and aggression and assaults, and that reflects on the entire camp. But it's not an unbased fear. So finding successful models to what I've heard from community is, how can we trust the city to manage camps when the unmanaged camps are so bad already? And I think that's an unfair comparison, but it is a comparison the community is making.
Because it's the only one they have, right? I mean, it's the only comparison they can make.
Yeah. And in order to, well, I'm thinking of examples and want to name one that I heard from LA recently and shared with Mickey, the process by which they supported folks at Venice Beach in transitioning from unsheltered homelessness into their Project Room Key and hotel spaces. And that was, I mean, they offered a very, I think they actually posted all of their policies and procedures, but it's truly rooted in one-on-one relationship building and case management with each person experiencing homelessness to support them in navigating through, as we were talking about before, behavioral health barriers, et cetera, to transition through. And that is the type of model or the type of example that I think could be powerful to the community to both humanize people experiencing homelessness and to demonstrate what it looks like to hold all of the things to be true at the same time, or many of the things to be true at the same time. But I'll incorporate that kind of lifting up examples. Maybe I'll add that as one of the implementation notes around community engagement and public education. Other thoughts or ideas here? around what's missing or what you'd love to see?
Brittany, just a quick note, kind of building off of that conversation, that I would love to see mentioned in the community engagement, the fact that homelessness is a symptom of like much larger forces. And there is nothing that a progressive city council could possibly do that would increase visible homelessness. So I think just mentioning the symptomatic nature of homelessness, that it's like a very visible manifestation of much larger failings.
Mm-hmm.
That is so right, Colleen. I've said that so many times. We're not treating homelessness. There's so much underlying to treat. And that's where this money and effort should really be going. But the visible piece is homeless.
Right. Yeah. I always say that it's dystopian that I have a career in homelessness. I would love for Fuse to not have to exist, but a more concrete note associated with that I know that the last point is about affordable housing between 0 and 30% AMI, but I think I would love to see the push for affordable housing be more broad maybe, and be included in the part about social service workers. I know that there was a little mention of that, but I think just as part of like the symptomatic nature of homelessness, that a push for affordable housing at all income levels, like say below 120% AMI, that feels important to me to include here as a priority somewhere.
So I think I want to separate that into two things, because I hear a call for the services workforce and the housing that they can and cannot afford. And I think that is certainly something to work into the two sections. Around the prioritization of 0 to 30, part of the reason this came up as a need here is that it's not being carried elsewhere, whereas 50 to 80% is something that's being prioritized elsewhere in the community with emphasis. The middle market housing work that the city is doing in particular, and I think generally given the relative ease of financing for projects that are at 50 or 60% AMI, often move quicker or are just prioritized because they're more doable for developers. And there needs to be actual political leadership and coalition building around this very low end spectrum of area median income. So I'm curious if that resonates, if there are things that we want to parse out here of what we want to do around 0 to 30 versus 0 to 50, or just, I want to check if that tracks. I just wanted to give you some of the background on where 0 to 30 became a priority or how.
Oh, sure. I agree with all that. I know that other folks are working on like the higher income level. I just know that at this point, it's hard to even get 100% AMI projects to pencil out. So I guess I would still like to see, even if not putting dollars behind it, just like an advocacy priority of this group for like systemic upstream prevention of homelessness would include at least like vocal support for projects that are going to bring those units online. And maybe that's outside of the focus, but I think that there could be a place for it here.
Got it. Thank you. Other feedback on the housing section here?
I mean, focusing in on this 0 to 30% AMI housing, I guess I very much understand the need and the effort to prioritize this by including this in here. But is this a unicorn? I mean, do we have, how much 0 to 30 AMI affordable housing do we have in our community? And if it doesn't even exist currently, then I mean, is this a reflection of how hard it is to create it? And if it's that hard to create, is any amount of saying that we need it going to actually help?
David.
So there actually is a reasonable amount of 0 to 30 housing, and it's largely because the state prioritizes it so heavily. that to get a project funded through the OHCS, you pretty much have to have 0 through 30s in the project. It may not be, the majority of it, but it'll be included. So virtually all of our developments in Bend have some 0 to 30s at least mixed in.
Right. So you'll have a certain number of units per project.
Yes.
Okay.
But people, I that's a really good question, Commissioner and Mr. Brandt, for responding that way. But the reality is people are on waiting lists for affordable housing in 0 to 30 for years. Like that.
Yeah, they're on their waiting list for affordable housing of 80% for 20 years.
So
the shortage is everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a really good question. Is just because we write it down, is it reality? Are we trying to altruistically? That'd be great. But what are we really looking for in a plan that we can actually accomplish in this time frame of the strategic plan, right? Because that may not even be accomplishable. So are we putting things in there that we already know just based on reality that's going to fail? And what's a realistic goal in there?
Or what more do we need to do to actually make it happen?
I know that in the list of revenue streams to explore, which I apologize for the heavy scroll, we did include exploring, let's see, bond measures in here, and affordable housing bond had been raised. If that's not in here, that's actually my error of something that needs to be included, and maybe this is a conversation that I can bring back, or Mickey, if you could loop in Lynn McConnell to this. This question I think is a really smart one. In Seattle, there, maybe not public information, I don't know if I can do this. Folks are exploring a lot of different alternative options to public housing because there's simply not enough, and there's already such a long list that creating alternatives may be more practical to pick up and run with. In Oregon, I know that's a lot harder, given land use and some restrictions, but maybe this is a question we could bring to Lynn as far as, if we don't have nearly enough 0 to 30, if we don't have nearly enough affordable housing to begin with, what is actually in our toolbox that we need to emphasize, rather than spending time in places that may be really challenging. There are creative solutions. They take a lot of work. They take a lot of work and a lot of new partners. In Detroit, for example, they built really strong partnerships with banks locally in order to really push on financing and what's possible. And that still isn't enough. But that's a type of partner to bring in to crack the financing nut. But it's hard work. So this is a question that I'll bring to Lynn and see if we can get a little bit clearer here on what's most realistic to emphasize. Because I don't think that there's, I don't mean to interpret it this way. I don't think there's a way that we can get around deeply affordable housing, but we need to get right to it rather than exploring lanes that haven't worked in the past, I think is the sentiment. Okay. Great. Tall order, but I'm glad to see all of the energy behind it. Okay. Other thoughts on housing? I'm happy to spin down our minutes on housing if we need to here, but it sounds like this might be a continued conversation via drafts. I'll meet with Lynn. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Chang.
I don't want to distract from housing, but there was one issue I wanted to circle back on with the education and outreach and community engagement. Somebody reminded me recently, we were talking about like, well, who are the homeless? What we've done with the story map, the website is so great in terms of helping people understand who the homeless are. But I think it was actually a reporter who said, yeah, but the thing is when you're walking down the street or you're like standing in line, going into an office or something, there are people in line with you who are homeless, who no one can identify as homeless, right? So the only people that the public identifies as homeless are the people who are, unkempt, or walking down the street speaking to themselves and things like that. There's this challenge for us in community engagement and educating the community about who the homeless are, which is that people who are identifiably homeless are just a small slice, and many of the homeless are invisible. And so I don't know how we address that in the process of doing our community engagement, but it's something that is in need.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I actually think that's really critical for some of the pieces around community engagement, because it is completely not understood. And I know the county doesn't have a PIO currently, but that would be a really nice project for a video contractor or a PIO to really look at the faces of homelessness more closely, because there are all sorts of people you're in the grocery store with and in the doctor's office with who are unhoused. And this plan addresses all of those folks. And we really lose community will when we imagine it's a monolith that looks one way. And many of those individuals who represent that stereotypical view occupied other lanes at some point in their journey through homelessness. And that's often overlooked as well. So totally agree. And if there's a way to contract with some great student group that wants to do some good PSAs or a good PIO type person, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in some of the Face of Homelessness reporting that the Bulletin has done. Like, hey, these 7 people who basically run the Snowcap and Sisters, they all live together in the forest in broken down RVs, right? So, but you wouldn't know when they're serving you your milkshake in the Snowcap that they're homeless.
Right.
Thank you both. I will find a way to work that in here carefully, and also want to lift up the impact that supporting people with lived experience in leading, advising on the collaborative office and the strategic plan can also help transform public perceptions. I've seen it happen here in Seattle through the Lived Experience Coalition, where people experiencing homelessness are truly treated and looked to as policy advisors. And it changes the public perception in a very dramatic way to see the newspaper citing a leader of the Lived Experience Coalition in suggesting this shelter, this model, this need that we have. There's certainly a value of the communications and messaging, and also living into it is going to be really helpful as well, as all this builds out. So thank you both for raising that. I think we have taken up all of our time here, which I'm so grateful for. Grateful for everybody's time today. You have this link in your inboxes. Please feel free to the link to the draft strategic plan. Please feel free to comment, add suggestions through edits. If you could sign them with your initials or your name, that would be really helpful. Just so that so that I can track back with you if I have any questions about it. I'm going to set March 31st as our deadline for feedback, so that it's not April Fool's Day, so that nobody thinks I'm joking. Next Thursday, March 31st, it would be great to get everybody's feedback. Early next week, you'll see a kind of, we'll call it version 5, with all of the updates and edits from a conversation with Lynn, your feedback today, the HLC meeting yesterday, and a prompt to take another look at those. I want to thank you all again for your commitment of time today and how deep you were able to go into this with us. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm really excited for what's to come. I hope everybody has a really good Tuesday.